Sherry has worked for the state government at the executive level in the social and human services area and later on in the health insurance industry. Now retired, she occasionally does healthcare consulting, but spends more of her time writing thrillers. Drawing on her travel experiences and her interest in social issues, Knowlton created Alexa Williams, a lawyer with a passion for justice and a knack for attracting trouble. Her five thrillers revolve around issues such as abortion, sex trafficking, and fracking, and they're intended to make you think. Dead on the Delta, the fifth book in the Alexa Williams series, was published this month. Set in Botswana, Alexa and her boyfriend Reese are members of a group researching lion behavior, and they become immersed in the politics of wildlife conservation, as well as a dangerous gang of poachers. Sherry, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Yes. What does a healthcare consultant do, by the way?
Well, my sort of little corner of healthcare consulting has a lot to do with Medicaid, which is the program for low-income people run by the government, and also what's known as Obamacare, the ACA. Because when I was in state government, which you mentioned, my last position there was Deputy Secretary for Medical Assistance. I ran the state's medical assistance program, then went and into the private sector and ran some Medicaid managed care plans. So I developed an expertise over the years, and I work mainly with insurers, but sometimes state governments,
Mhm.
to give them advice or write proposals, that sort of thing.
That kind of knowledge work is very important. I have a friend of mine who works for the pharmaceutical industry, and
Ah,
she's the kind of the go-between the company she works for and the FDA, or whoever oversees prescription drugs, and it's quite astonishing. um, well, it's just astonishing the work she has to do and what she has to do and how valuable it is that even after she retired, she still does like what you've been doing is consulting for them. So
yeah.
it's just amazing the little jobs that are vital that you have to have people who are very knowledgeable about the complexities of in your case the healthcare system, as anyone who has had to go to a doctor has found out.
Exactly.
Okay. um I wanted to ask, let's see, did you always want to tell stories?
I think the answer to that is yes. I think it started with I always wanted to read stories. I mean, from the time I was a little kid, the constant refrain at my house was, Sherry, get your nose out of that book. Uh, because if I had like an ounce of spare time, I would be reading. Uh, and so somewhere along the line, even when I was a little kid, I started being one of the people that produced a newspaper for my elementary school, which was a mimeograph sheet. That I'm dating myself, or writing stuff for those little journals that would publish school kids poetry and stories. And then I did a high school newspaper and college newspaper, and really was planned to be a journalist. And then life sort of took over, and I drifted into a state government job, and never really got a chance to write uh, fiction. I kept trying, but having time for it, especially when I got into executive positions, just wasn't, it just wasn't possible. At least I couldn't juggle both. Sometimes I worked 60-hour weeks, so you just don't have time. But what I did do in all of my jobs was a lot of professional writing, legislation, regulations, plans, proposals. So the day came about, I guess it's about 10 years ago now, when I started doing part-time consulting, left my full-time job. And I, at that point, I said, well, if you're ever going to write that novel that you've been talking about for years, uh, this is the time to do it. And so I did.
Mhm. It's fascinating. I didn't know you had kind of a journalism background. And it
Yeah.
seems like that's that type of reporting and reportage that a writer would do then would end up kind of informing your work as well, because you're also kind of doing reporting in your Alexa series too.
I guess that's an interesting perspective, but I guess you're right because I like to talk to really include issues, contemporary issues, even historical issues. But in my books, it's not just a mystery; it's a mystery or a thriller that revolves around an event or a concept. Uh, and usually they're sort of from the headlines type concepts.
Hmm. When you're deciding, when you're plotting a book, does the issue come to mind first as saying, oh, I'd like to write about that? Or is it more an organic process of coming up with a plot and seeing where it takes you?
Uh, I think it's a little bit of both. On my first book, I really wanted, which deals with issues of women's right to choose, some fundamentalist religion things, militia, which is, interestingly enough, back in the news again, with the things that are being talked about today, even in the impeachment trial. But but what really I wanted to write about was a newspaper article. Going back to your thought about news that I'd read years and years ago, where the body of a young woman was found in the woods, not far from where I live, near the Michaud State Forest. And it always just sort of tugged at my heart that for years nobody could identify that young woman's body. And that was sort of the genesis of it. And then these issues that were important to me also found their way into the plot.
So was that a conscious effort on your part, or did you suddenly, because writers, we learn that writers sometimes write just to discover what they're thinking.
Yeah, it's I guess as I'm an outliner, so I do outline my concepts, but all of the pieces just sort of fell together. So when I, talked about a young woman alone in the woods, who had been killed, I had a historical plot of the three babes in the woods, which is a child murder from the Depression, an actual another true story. They seem to like echo through time, though those two sets of women or girls found dead and not being identified. And then suddenly that morphed in my mind into these other issues that make women vulnerable.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. Well, at the center of your books is Alexa Williams, and I described her a little bit, but could you give us a little more, a better idea of who she is and you know what she's all about?
Sure. Alexa is a 30-ish lawyer. She lives in this area here where I live, Carlisle, Pennsylvania area. And she lives in a little cabin in the woods. But she spent at the beginning of the books, she spent the last decade or so in New York City, where she went to law school, practiced at a big city law firm, and just wanted to get out of the rat race, come home. So she comes home, rejoins the family law firm, moves into her old family cabin with her English Mastiff Scout, and she just is looking for a zen life in the woods. She likes to hike and all of that sort of stuff. But somehow that keeps eluding her because she keeps stumbling over dead bodies at different places. And then that draws her into trouble because she's one of these people who just can't let well enough alone. And she gets drawn into danger.
Mm-hmm. I'm reminded of a quote from Sue Grafton, who she said that Kinsey Milhone, her detective hero, she described her as her alter ego, the person she might have been had she hadn't married young and had children. And there's also, I think it was might have been Larry Niven who said if there's a word for people who try to draw inferences between the authors and their characters, and that's idiot. So where do you stand with Alexa? Does she have things that you have some wish fulfillment, or you just decided this is who she's going to be and let her be who she is?
I'd say that some of the I'm not a lawyer, although I did think about law school at one time, but some of the trappings of her life are, a little similar to mine, like small things. She drinks chai tea. I love chai tea. I live in the woods, and so does Alexa. We used to have English Mastiffs, and so Scout is sort of a tribute to all of those dogs that we had in our lives. But she's not necessarily a younger, prettier version of me.
Mhm,
She's her own character
mhm.
because, you know, I don't think I would be comfortable stumbling over dead bodies at every turn myself.
I would find it very difficult to play the amateur detective. It's in some ways, Zoom interviews are really nice because it's can be kind of intimate, but the screen gets turned off and everything is fine. I'm too much of an introvert to
Right.
be able to do that. You've written 5 books about Alexa's adventures, starting with Dead of Autumn and followed by Dead of Summer and Dead of Spring and Dead of Winter. Over those books, has she changed?
Yes, she has in some ways.
Mhm,
I think she's gotten a little more mature. She's gotten actually more comfortable, I think, in dealing with dangerous situations. She doesn't freak out. And in fact, in one of the books, she was taking Krav Maga classes to, just to be prepared. Uh, she has a lot of trouble with romance. So that, she's been through some different phases with men, ups and downs, ups and downs. But I think she's grown more content with her life. And remember, she's a 30 something. So I know at that age, wasn't totally settled down yet. And she's sort of like that. She's not totally settled, but she definitely is happier being home. And even though she's not living quite the Zen life that she anticipated, I think she thinks she's doing good when she confronts these dangerous situations.
mhm, yeah. So, should they be read in order, or can you just get drop in anytime, like with the latest version?
Yeah, they're written to be, standalones that you could, not true standalones, but the standalone enough that you could pick up each book on its own, and it would be an independent adventure.
Mhm,
Uh, I think that if you think you may really be into sort of a kick-ass female heroine and you want to follow her, it would be best to start with the first.
mhm. Okay. This one is set in Africa, in Botswana, in Southern Africa. What kind of research have you had to do for this book?
Well, this research was a lot of fun. I like to do research for all the books. I'm one of these people who thinks that you have to be very factual, even though it's fiction. Uh, but for this one, my husband and I, we like to travel. So we've been to Africa many times on safari. We keep going back again and again. But for this, I realized as I started to write that I really needed more specifics. It's one thing to go on vacation and have fun, it's another thing to try to write about it. And so what I decided was, well, this is a great excuse to go back to Botswana. And and we spent a month on safari, and also went to the capital city of Botswana. We'd never been to Gaborone. We went to another little town that I wanted to talk about in the book. I learned about the government, and one of the most fun things is that I wanted to talk about uh, lion research. Alexa's boyfriend from a previous book uh, is a lion researcher. And so he's doing this, special project in Africa, and she goes along. But I realized I really didn't know what a day-to-day life of a lion researcher entailed. So I was able to get a lion researcher who works for a project sponsored by the University of Oxford in England, but it happens in Botswana. And she was a young woman and spent 3 days with me out in the bush, telling me all about how to be a lion researcher.
Yes,
So
those are great moments that make it really worthwhile to be a writer.
it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was very impressed. I saw that in the acknowledgments that the Oxford University Wildlife Conservation Research Unit, that
Yeah.
how did you ever find them? It's
Well, the company that we've gone to Botswana with, the travel company, is called Wilderness Safaris. And so I sort of, thought, well, how am I going to find a lion researcher who works in Botswana? And I ended up talking to somebody there. They sponsor part of Wild Cruise research. They let the researchers stay in their camps, use their vehicles, things like that. And so they talked to the Wild Crew people. They had to get permission from Oxford to spend time with me. But then, we arranged it so that we could meet up with Robin, is her name. And that's how it all happened. It was through my safari company. So
that's
I'm really
fascinating. Yeah,
grateful to them. Yeah.
that's fascinating. And you put in a plug for them in the acknowledgments and a solicitation for donations. So if readers want to help them in their work, they can go ahead and make direct donations to the to the unit as well. So I was also impressed, and it tells that you've been there because I see all these details that I'm thinking you can't get that out of a book. Like there was a scene where they're serving soup to everyone and it's pumpkin soup. And there was their joke that like 90% of the meals in Botswana, if it's soup, it's going to be pumpkin.
Yeah, luckily I love pumpkin soup, but we did get it a lot at almost every camp when we were there.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the thing about travel. You got to like the food wherever you're going, or else you're just going to be hungry. um, so, um, what's next for Alexa and Reese then? Is there another book in the works, or are you taking a break?
Well, right now I'm taking a break and I'm working on a travel memoir. I'm not even 100% sure why I started it. People kept telling me, especially in my writing critique group, they kept saying, "Well, you should write about this. You should write about this." When I would mention things. So, a lot of time here during the pandemic, being squirreled away at home, and so I started to write a memoir. I'm, pretty done, almost done with the first draft. But I do expect to get back to Alexa and Reese. I haven't determined the details yet of the story. I think it will probably come back home to South Central Pennsylvania, where the other books are set. But I think this African interlude will play in a little bit to the next story as well.
Well, I'm sure your readers will be very eager to find out what happens next because, of course, you leave Alexa and Reese's relationship. I wouldn't say on a cliffhanger, but there's obviously a little bit of trouble going on there that you know,
Life is just not smooth, especially in fiction.
especially in fiction. Oh, I wanted to ask because your book has been published by Sunbury Press.
Mhm.
Um, what kind of relationship? How did you get in with Sunbury Press and their Milford House imprint? I wasn't aware that it existed.
The imprints at Sunbury are fairly new, and I can talk about that in a minute. But the uh, the way I had the book published, the first book, Dead of Autumn, published by Sunbury Press, was I think somewhat a combination of luck and timing. But when I'd written, I really didn't know that much about the mechanics of publishing, and I think many authors don't when they start out. And so I had a pretty good, like, third, or maybe since it was my first book, it might have been my fourth or fifth draft,
Mhm.
but I had a pretty solid manuscript. And I happened to go to a conference that the Bosler Library here, they used to do these big conferences. Of course, they haven't had one for a couple of years. And Lawrence Knorr, who's the publisher of Sunbury Press, which is located nearby in Mechanicsburg, he happened to be a speaker on a workshop panel about different aspects of publishing. So I approached him. I actually had a little synopsis with me, just in case. I was a Girl Scout, be prepared, you know? So I had this little synopsis. He was interested enough to read it. I think he was intrigued by the Babes in the Woods story that was part of the book, which goes back to the three young girls who had been murdered during the Depression. And he contacted me in a couple weeks and said, I'd like to see 50 pages. And so I sent them to him, and they offered me a contract. Uh, and I was faced with that position of, do I try to go and get an agent and, try a big five publisher or something, which could take years, or do I go with a perfectly reputable small press and have my first book published, within the year? And so I haven't really looked back.
It's the type of luck writers dream of, but hate when somebody else gets it.
And along the way, I think it was about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, Sunbury, which publishes a wide range of books, that, they don't specialize just in, thrillers or anything like that. In fact, they probably do a better nonfiction business than they do in terms of fiction, although they have lots of fiction authors like me. But they decided to try to differentiate uh, between different imprints, one for suspense and fiction, another one for uh, poetry, another one for nonfiction. I can't, off the top of my head, give you all the imprints, but they have a number of imprints now.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure where that came from, but we'll just pass over that. Where can readers find you?
Sorry,
Huh?
that was a thing on my computer that popped in. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. So where can readers find you? I know you have a website, sherryknowlton.com, right?
Correct. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter,
Mhm.
Instagram, and the books themselves are really almost wherever books are sold. Of course, here in this area, in the Carlisle Mechanicsburg area, Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop has them. Whistle Stop Bookstop has them. But online, and you can really get them at your local bookshop. You may have to order, but they can come quickly. But also Sunbury Press, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, you name it, you can probably get it online as well.
That's great. And while readers can wait for your travel memoir, they can go through your Dead of series and have some good reads in store. Sherry, thank you for coming on to the show. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity.